Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to this expert interview. My name is Hollis Matthews, and I am an intern at the Turkish Heritage Organization. The Turkish Heritage Organization is a nonprofit organization that is focused on fostering discussions on US-Turkey relations, foreign policy, and NATO. Today, I have the honor of introducing and interviewing Dr. Osman Gultekin. Dr. Osman Gultekin is the president of the Protevniyal Alumni Association in Turkey and has also recently completed his doctoral studies in political science and international relations at Bahçeşehir University in Istanbul. His major research interests are in international relations theories, educational diplomacy, international higher education, and so much more. He also recently published his book titled National Education and Construction of Power, The Case of Turkey. Thank you so much, Dr. Gultekin, for being here and for giving me the opportunity to interview you today. And without further ado, we will just go ahead and dive right in.
Okay, thank you. I would like to thank THO and you for inviting me and having me in this session. To answer your question, my interest in the topic of international education started when I first participated in a US cultural exchange program in my second year of university at Boğaziçi University. And I participated in the program, and after I started to work as a study abroad consultant, and I dealt with thousands of students. During this work, I realized that those programs were a great financial source for hosting countries. And at the same time, they were also a great way for cultural influence. International students were voluntary and willing people for those countries' cultural exposure. And at the same time, they were influenced by the host country's way of life, culture, values, and norms. And those were the times, like 15 years ago, when the concept of soft power was one of the most popular concepts all around the world. And I wanted to explore the situation for Turkey. And during the research for my thesis, a number of major developments happened in the academic literature and in the international education field also. First of all, the numbers of international students traveling in the world and incoming to Turkey have increased dramatically. And secondly, there have been some new trends that emerged in international student mobility, such as regionalization and the South-South student mobility versus traditional way of from South to North mobility. And thirdly, and most importantly, I think, I noticed that national governments' involvement in international education was representing a very interesting case. I call this situation a form of mercantilism because the national governments were giving incentives to their national education institutions and cooperating with them for their global promotion and marketing. And by this, they were aiming economic and political influence. And ultimately, they were competing with other countries over international education. Clearly, there has been a race for soft power. In that sense, I thought national governments' involvement and their ambitious positions in international education business was representing another realm of power struggle in the world. And it was of great importance in international relations as an academic discipline. And it was really worth to make research on, I think. Later, I found that traditionally there have been three ways to approach studying international education: philosophical, and secondly, pedagogical, and with comparative methods. Other than these three approaches, what I claim is that I believe political science and international relations aspect needs to be added to study international education because of education's political and international character that has gained more importance over the last decades.
That is certainly very interesting. Thank you so much for that overview and analysis. My next question is regarding your recent book. Your recent book is about national education rather than international education. And so why is that distinction important?
Yes, at some point we need to make the distinction of national education versus international education. But we also need to know that all the education programs originally have to be national because they are a part of a national educational system of a country, basically. What makes them international is that those national educational systems have students from other countries and they have an international curriculum. My recent book, National Education and Construction of Power, is the first book of Education and Power book series. It focuses on domestic level. It investigates the role of national education in the country's power building. Let me show my book here. It is in Turkish for now, and 150-year-old Perteniyer School, that I'm the president of its alumni association, is on the cover. I hope to have it translated in English with updates within a year. So anyway, as far as the soft power is concerned, we can say educational soft power is a function of education with both two components, national education and international education. Whereas national education is the foundational part of educational soft power, on the other hand, international education helps countries to disseminate and enhance the effect of their soft power influence internationally. So, in order to analyze the relationship between education in general and power as a notion in political science and international relations, we have to start from the national educational systems. As we go from the state level to international system level, this relationship evolves gradually and gets more complex. Regarding this, for example, I observed there are three stages in this evolving and gradual relationship, starting from national education towards international education. In the first stage, we see education contributes to a country's power domestically by the means of many things, such as modernization, democratization, economic growth, technology, human capital, and development. By all these means, the countries construct their own power with the help of their national education systems. So the national education at the domestic level can be considered as a soft power producer or a power generator, let's say, for countries. This stage is analyzed in my first book of Education and Power book series. And in the second stage, we observe education by its nature has an international and cross-border character across countries. So at this point, comparative and international education concept and as an academic discipline becomes very significant and international student mobility needs to be researched on. In the third stage, we see international education contributes to the country's soft power and it acts as an enhancer or disseminator and maybe multiplier of the country's image and soft power influence crossing borders. This is the part that has really important impacts on the international relations of the countries. This is where international education actually becomes a very crucial part of countries' public diplomacy, specifically cultural diplomacy and educational diplomacy.
Thank you. That is definitely certainly very relevant today. So I definitely appreciate your insights. Do you think the direction of international education and student mobility has anything to do with the global order in today's world?
I think this is the most interesting and exciting part of the relationship between international education and soft power. For many decades, some scholars have suggested the direction of international student mobility reflects the world power structure, meaning that the traditional host countries, mostly the powerful countries in the West, such as the United States, the UK, France, and Germany, were in the center of international education. On the other hand, the South or East countries were in the peripheries, and they were mainly the sender countries and followers of the West. And some scholars claim this situation has created some form of cultural imperialism in the world. However, in the last decade, I think I should specify here that till right before the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, there were two most important trends in international student mobility observed related to world order. The first one is regionalization in international student mobility. So there were emerging regional educational hub countries such as Turkey, Malaysia, and Qatar. And China and Russia can be good major examples as well. And these two countries from the East are among the top 10 international student receiving countries already. So the Western supremacy in international education is challenged by two major powers and also by partially by other regional hub countries in the eastern part of the world. The second important trend has been the soft power competition over international education among countries. For this, the countries started to declare very ambitious targets for the number of international students that they would like to host. They announced very prominent world-class university projects to attract more international students. And also they wanted to include more national universities of their countries in higher rankings on the global university ranking lists. So those two trends, regionalization and soft power competition, suggest that Eastern countries are challenging the Western countries' supremacy, not only in international education, but also in the global power structure. Those Eastern countries are engaging and investing heavily, not only in international higher education, but also in other public diplomacy channels, such as cultural institutes abroad, worldwide TV broadcasting, and hosting mega events. While on the one hand, some scholars suggest these heavy investments and new international student mobility patterns affect the current world power order. On the other hand, some others say this situation is not shaping the world order, but reflecting it. And it's a mere reflection of the new reality of the world order as the world phases from a unipolar power structure to a multipolar one, as some international relations scholars suggest also.
That is great. Thank you. Thank you very much. For my next question, I actually would like to pivot to public diplomacy. In your opinion, what is the place of international education in the public diplomacy of countries? And how has this been working, especially before the pandemic?
Uh, Before the outbreak of the pandemic, the cultural and diplomatic effect of international education in the public diplomacy framework was assumed to be possible only through the physical movements of international students from one country to another. And the host countries were assuming the students who are coming to study in their countries will think how great their country and culture are. And also they were thinking when their national students go abroad for education, they will be their cultural ambassadors to the world, and they will show how great their people and culture are to the rest of the world. However, things don't go always like that. It is indeed a two-way interaction rather than a one-way. The students whom they send abroad may like it better there and stay there. By this, they might lose their most talented and the brightest students to other countries, and that would cause what is called basically brain drain. In addition, the students whom they hosted may not always be sympathizers of their countries. Actually, there are many examples of that. For example, Said Qutb was a university exchange student in the United States. When he returned back to his own country, to Egypt, he became very active against the United States global policies, and he influenced many people. So for national governments, they should be aware that hosting international students is a very critical and serious business. The quality of education, along with other elements of soft power, really matters. They need to be attractive in all aspects: the culture, the people, the environment, living standards, quality of higher education, campus facilities. All those items are important. Ultimately, international students' learning and cultural experience, and their overall satisfaction determine the country's educational soft power image.
Those are certainly some very powerful observations and analyses, so I definitely appreciate it. Here for my next question, I would actually like to ask you about the interplay between soft power and international education. So how does this mechanism work between the two specifically, and what did you personally find in your research?
I think before answering to this question, I need to tell a little bit about soft power as a concept in international relations and how I see it. To start with, soft power is a type of power that stems from a country's attractive elements, such as culture, values, and foreign affairs. And it depends on the people's perceptions. So, unlike hard power, it is very intangible, hard to measure it. Also, it's a form of power neither purely liberal nor realist. As the father of the concept, Joseph Nye tells the same thing. If it was at the beginning of my research, I would think of soft power as more of a liberal concept. But now I think I'm inclined to accept it as a more of realist concept rather than liberal. Some scholars also call soft power an iron fist in a velvet glove. And I can definitely understand the reason why they call it like that. And recently we start to talk about sharp powers. Sharp powers imply the manipulation of soft power in a global power struggle. Sharp powers use soft power techniques heavily, including international education, along with other public diplomacy channels. But those powers don't really have anything attractive to offer to the rest of the world with regards to their democratic credentials and values and norms. As far as international education is concerned, a country's soft power image is particularly influential during two stages. One of them is in pre-departure period. The second one is in the post-departure period. In the pre-departure period, prospective international students are influenced by state-level soft power indicators, such as GDP of the country's positions in world politics and in international organizations, their technology, their world famous brands, number of universities in global university rankings. They are all essential in this period. Pre-departure period is all about the perceptions by looking from outside without any experience. However, during the post-departure period, after the international students start to live and study in a foreign country, individual level perceptions with regards to the satisfaction about their international education experience in the host country gain greater importance. The post-departure period perceptions give us more realistic feedback about countries' soft power image because they are based on the lived experiences of real people. And in my research, I surveyed more than 500 foreign students. I asked about both their pre-departure and post-departure perceptions. And I particularly was interested in observing the negative or positive change in their soft power perceptions from pre-departure period to post-departure period. Only this information, I thought, could help me to test whether this international education business of countries is really helping the country's soft power image. And I found that international education does not always support the country's soft power necessarily, especially in the post-departure period if some conditions are not satisfied. In some soft power items, the international students might leave the host countries with negative images on their minds. So I conclude that the satisfaction of international students is imperative for host countries to enhance or sustain their soft power image. I have to admit here that the subject of the role of international education in international relations and its relationship with soft power were way larger and more comprehensive than I thought at the beginning of my research.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And that actually brings me to our last question for today. In your opinion, what is going to happen after this pandemic as far as the relationship between international education and international relations is concerned?
Okay. Um, right before the pandemic, the international higher education sector has been witnessing an economic and soft power competition by the nation states, and it has started to be a part of global power competition, as I mentioned earlier. But now there are substantial changes in international education activities, such as new forms of educational deliveries, operations, and policies. The trends and concepts of digitalization of teaching, virtual internationalization, and rediscovery of online and distance education. They are becoming very significant. And in the meantime, in the students' learning level, digital fatigue, stress disorders, and mood instabilities are very common psychological issues the students are facing from these virtual international education activities. With all those inputs, I think we definitely have to reconsider the role of international education in international relations and its effect on public diplomacy and world affairs in the post-pandemic period. But the pandemic, of course, still goes on, and we still need to observe how things are going to shape for the future. But regardless of world politics, I believe what the stakeholders of international education need to focus on is what really happens on the campuses and in the classrooms, let it be physical or virtual. They need to ensure the international students are having rewarding learning and cultural experiences during their programs.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gultekin, for the opportunity to conduct this interview. I feel like I've learned so much. Just all of your insights and analyses were so important and relevant. So we definitely appreciate your time. And also thank you to our audience for watching. And please be sure to check out all of THO's events and publications at our website. And we look forward to hosting more wonderful expert interviews in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.